When officers arrived at the scene, they were confronted with a horrific sight. What lay beyond the threshold was the stuff of nightmares. A scene so horrific it would haunt even the most seasoned officers for years to come. The apartment was in utter disarray, as if a violent tornado had swept through the rooms. Blood was everywhere. It streaked across the walls in dark crimson smears, pooled ominously on the floorboards, and soaked deeply into the mattress of the bed. As the officers moved further into the bedroom, the full horror was revealed. Beneath a blood-soaked sheet, they discovered Christina Kraft's lifeless body. Rigor mortis had already set in, her limbs stiff and unyielding. Her body bore the marks of a relentless and frenzied assault, a chilling reflection of the rage. Christina Carlin Kraft was born on July 11, 1981, into a close-knit, loving, and resilient family. Her early years were filled with warmth, support, and the bonds of a household that valued unity. However, tragedy struck in 1990, when Christina was just 9 years old. Her mother, who had been a pillar of strength and nurturing care in the family, passed away unexpectedly. This devastating loss left an indelible mark on young Christina, forever shaping her perspective on family and life. Her father, a strong and determined man, decided to raise Christina and her brother and sister on his own. For years, he managed to balance the responsibilities of work and parenthood, ensuring his children never lacked for love. Eventually, however, he remarried, hoping to bring stability and a sense of completeness back into their lives. With the arrival of a new stepmother, life changed again for Christina. The stepmother brought her own children from previous relationships into the fold, and what had once been a small, tightly knit family almost doubled. Navigating the dynamics of a blended family wasn't always easy, but it instilled in Christina an ability to adapt, compromise, and forge her own path. After completing high school, Christina ventured into the workforce, securing a job as a waitress at a bustling casino along the coast. Though this job was far from glamorous, it was a formative experience for her. She learned invaluable life lessons about hard work, resilience, and dealing with people from all walks of life. But Christina had dreams that far exceeded the confines of the casino floor. Her striking appearance, undeniable charm, and magnetic personality often drew attention, and Christina had always envisioned herself in a different light. She dreamed of becoming a successful model, a face admired on the glossy pages of prestigious fashion magazines. The summer of 2003 would prove to be a turning point in Christina's life. The coastal region where she worked was undergoing rapid transformation. Approximately $1 million had been invested into the area's infrastructure to turn it into a thriving, high-end resort destination. This development began attracting the elite, including wealthy investors, entrepreneurs, and socialites. Among them was Alex Chiatelli, a prominent and highly successful banker with a keen eye for opportunity and beauty. From the moment Alex saw Christina, it was as if fate had intervened in him. They fell deeply in love, bonding over shared dreams and mutual admiration. Over the next 14 years, Christina and Alex built a life together that many would envy. They were inseparable, living as a family even though they never formalized their relationship through marriage. Despite their love, Christina chose to delay having children, remaining laser-focused on her ambitions. She was determined to make her mark in the competitive world of modeling. Alex, ever supportive, encouraged her dreams wholeheartedly. His unwavering belief in her talent gave Christina the confidence to push forward in pursuit of her goals. Even as a child, Christina had dabbled in modeling, participating in small projects and amateur photo shoots. However, as her confidence grew, so did the opportunities. Gradually, offers began to flow in more steadily, allowing Christina to establish herself as a sought-after model. Her captivating beauty and ability to connect with the camera led to her work being featured in several popular publications. The more exposure Christina gained, the more her popularity soared. Her calendar quickly filled with photo shoots, casting calls, and opportunities that once seemed like distant dreams. But despite her growing success, Christina's ultimate aspiration remained unfulfilled. She wanted to grace the pages of magazine she considered to be the pinnacle of a model's career. For Christina, appearing in magazine was not just about fame. It was about proving to herself and others that she could compete with the very best. Determined to make her dream a reality, Christina joined the thousands of hopeful applicants who submitted their portfolios to the editorial team. For years, She waited and worked tirelessly, striving to build a portfolio that would set her apart. Finally, in 2009, her perseverance paid off. Christina received a phone call that would change her life. She had been chosen as Girl of the Week, a prestigious opportunity that would see her photos published alongside a short biography in magazine as part of a special feature. For Christina, this was the moment she had been waiting for, a significant step toward achieving her dream. The photo shoot took place on May 4th, 2009, and it was nothing short of a success. Christina dazzled the camera with her confidence and beauty, delivering a set of images that were both elegant and alluring. While this feature was not the coveted cover or center spread, she had long envisioned, it was a breakthrough nonetheless. With her newfound association with magazine, Christina's world expanded rapidly. She began attending exclusive events, mingling with Hollywood celebrities, and enjoying opportunities she had only ever dreamed of. Yet in the competitive hierarchy of magazine models, she remained on the lower rungs, a position that fueled her determination to climb even higher. Christina remained confident that it was only a matter of time before she would stand alongside the magazine's most iconic and celebrated models. Unfortunately, Christina soon encountered a harsh reality that many models face: age. At the time of her magazine debut, she was already 26 years old, a milestone that the magazine's standards viewed as nearing the upper limit for fresh talent. In an industry notorious for its emphasis on youth, Christina's chances of achieving her ultimate dream began to fade. Despite her relentless efforts, her modeling career began to lose momentum, ultimately ending as quickly as it had begun. But Christina was not one to surrender easily. A woman of ambition and vision, she pivoted her focus, determined to find success in other areas of life. Yet, her connection to magazine proved to be a double-edged sword. While the magazine had granted her a taste of fame, its controversial reputation cast a shadow over her professional pursuits. Major brands and reputable publications, wary of the magazine's provocative image, began to turn Christina away. She attended countless auditions, interviews, and meetings across the United States, only to be met with rejection time and again. At the same time, Christina began to understand that popularity brought its own set of challenges and dangers. After the publication, Christina found herself the target of relentless stalkers who became increasingly bold and invasive. At first, the incidents were minor: unwanted messages, suspicious vehicles parked near her home, and occasional confrontations in public. However, the situation escalated quickly. Threatening notes began appearing on her car windshield, and unknown individuals followed her as she went about her day. Alex Chiotelli, deeply concerned for Christina's safety, urged her to step away from the modeling industry entirely. He believed it had brought them more danger than happiness. After weeks of convincing, Christina finally agreed to leave behind her modeling career and relocate with Alex to the quiet and affluent suburb of Ardmore, Pennsylvania. There, in a peaceful and upscale neighborhood, the couple hoped to find sanctuary. On August 21, 2018, Alex left for a routine business trip to New York City. He had traveled often for work, and the couple was accustomed to brief periods apart. That evening, as was his habit, Alex called Christina to say goodnight. She didn't answer. Initially, he didn't worry. Christina was known for her active lifestyle and busy schedule. Perhaps she was in the shower, out for a late walk, or had simply fallen asleep early. He decided to try again in the morning, but the next morning brought only silence. Alex dialed Christina's number multiple times, but her phone remained unresponsive. This was deeply uncharacteristic of her. She always kept her phone nearby and made a point of staying in contact. Yet Alex's packed day of meetings left him little time to dwell on his unease. By evening, however, his concern turned to outright panic. He had called Christina dozens of times, but still, there was no answer. An oppressive feeling of dread settled over him. Something was terribly wrong. Alex abandoned all his plans and immediately made his way back to Ardmore. Arriving at their shared apartment around 9 p.m., Alex's anxiety spiked when he found that his key would not unlock the door. At first, he thought the lock might be jammed or the door blocked from the inside. He pounded on the door, calling Christina's name, but there was no response. His phone remained eerily silent, and all signs pointed to something being terribly amiss. With no other options, Alex called the police. The local law enforcement, familiar with the quiet and affluent neighborhood, were slow to react initially. Such areas rarely experienced serious crimes, and officers were accustomed to responding to false alarms or petty complaints. However, the dispatcher's attitude shifted when they checked the address. Just 4 days earlier, Christina had filed a police report about a break-in at the very same apartment. While nothing had been stolen, she had mentioned feeling like someone had been inside, moving items, leaving subtle signs of their presence. A patrol unit was dispatched immediately. Upon arrival, the officers found Alex pacing anxiously outside the apartment, visibly distressed. After attempting the door themselves and confirming it was locked, they made the decision to force entry. The door splintered under their combined effort, and what awaited them beyond the threshold would haunt them forever. The apartment was in utter chaos. Furniture had been overturned, cushions slashed open, and personal items scattered as if someone had been searching frantically for something. The destruction pointed to either a violent struggle or a psychotic outburst. But the horror truly unfolded when the officers entered the bedroom. Blood was everywhere. It stained the walls, seeped into the floorboards, and saturated the bed. Underneath a crimson-soaked sheet, the officers found Christina's lifeless body. Rigor mortis had already begun to set in, and the extent of her injuries was beyond anything they had seen before. Her face had been disfigured so severely that she was barely recognizable. Her nose had been crushed into. The bones in her face had been smashed, as though her attacker had stomped on her repeatedly with unrelenting rage. Cuts, bruises, and abrasions covered her body, evidence of a prolonged and merciless assault. Around her neck were clear signs of strangulation. The ligature marks suggested that a foreign object, possibly clothing or an electrical cord, had been used to end her life. However, the weapon was nowhere to be found. For investigators, this detail raised chilling questions. Had the killer brought the weapon, or had they taken it with them afterward? Either way, the ferocity of the attack left no doubt that Christina's murderer had acted out of a deep, uncontrolled rage. Naturally, Alex became the first suspect. As Christina's partner, the police knew they needed to question him immediately. He was brought to the station, where his visible shock and grief only deepened. Over the course of an hour and a half, detectives carefully examined his alibi. Fortunately for Alex, it was ironclad. Phone records, surveillance footage, and testimonies from colleagues confirmed that he had been in New York City the entire time. Reluctantly, the police were forced to rule him out. But this left them with a chilling problem. The case now had no clear suspects. The investigation intensified. The eerie connection between Christina's earlier report of a break-in and her murder could not be ignored. Detectives believed that the intruder from 4 days prior had returned, this time with far deadlier intentions. The police were convinced that these two incidents were connected. At the time of Christina's murder, the investigation into the recent robbery was still ongoing, and detectives had just started analyzing crucial CCTV footage. Previously, investigators had spoken with Christina, and their joint efforts made it possible to reconstruct the chain of events that preceded the unpleasant incident in the apartment. It was revealed that on Friday, August 17th, Christina had spent the evening at a popular bar in the city center. Known for her love of socializing, she had been out with friends, but something about that night was different. Around 3 in the morning, Christina returned home. The following morning, on August 18, Christina Kraft awoke with a throbbing, unbearable headache. She was disoriented and shocked to discover herself lying sprawled on the floor of her own apartment. Confusion and dread set in as Christina struggled to recall the events of the previous night. She vividly remembered having just a few drinks at the bar, certainly not enough to cause complete memory loss or render her unconscious. Christina, sharp and intuitive, became convinced that someone had slipped a substance into her drink. Determined to piece the night together, she began examining her apartment. As she looked around, the disarray in the room became impossible to ignore. Panic turned to grim realization. Several valuable possessions were missing. Designer handbags, luxury shoes, jewelry, and credit cards had all been taken. Desperate to understand what had happened, Christina recounted the only details she could remember. She had been driven home that night by a young African-American taxi driver, roughly 30 years old. This lead seemed insignificant at first, but the investigation soon unearthed a more chilling narrative. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from the cameras positioned outside Christina's apartment building, and what they saw shocked them. The footage showed Christina's arrival in a taxi at approximately 3 a.m. As soon as Christina stepped out of the vehicle, she visibly lost consciousness, collapsing onto the sidewalk. The driver, the same young man Christina described, was seen dragging her limp body back into the cab's back seat. Moments later, the man appeared to retrieve Christina's keys. He then made his way into her apartment building, leaving the incapacitated woman behind in the car. Once inside the apartment, the driver stayed for over an hour. Surveillance footage from nearby showed him struggling to carry a large, heavy box out of the building upon his departure. The effort it took to move the box suggested that it was filled with stolen items, likely the valuables Christina later discovered missing. After securing the stolen goods in his taxi, woke Christina and physically assisted her up to her apartment. With unsettling nonchalance, he then drove away, leaving behind no immediate trace of his intrusion. Upon reviewing this footage, law enforcement officials turned to the public for help. They released still images of the suspect, pleading with anyone who recognized him to come forward with information. At the same time, investigators began delving into Christina's personal history, hoping to uncover other clues that might explain why she had been targeted. It wasn't long before the police stumbled upon a significant incident from Christina's past. In 2016, she had made headlines when police were called to an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Christina had reportedly been involved in a heated altercation with the restaurant manager, which escalated when she struck the employee multiple times. She was arrested at the scene, though the matter was later resolved with Alex's intervention. Christina received probation for 6 months, and the incident was largely forgotten. The police briefly entertained the possibility of revenge, suspecting that the altercation could have left someone with a grudge. However, this theory was quickly ruled out. The most significant lead came when detectives began revisiting Christina's early modeling career. Her appearance in magazines had earned her both fame and unwanted attention. It was well known that models, especially those associated with provocative magazines, often attracted stalkers. Investigators discovered that Christina maintained multiple profiles on platforms related to the modeling industry, which could have made it easier for someone to track her down. Meanwhile, the police followed another crucial lead: Christina's stolen credit cards. Bank statements revealed that the cards had been used hours after her murder at a small grocery store located near her apartment. Surveillance footage from the store confirmed the identity of the user, the same taxi driver who had been recorded outside Christina's building. With this breakthrough, investigators identified the suspect as Andre Melton, a man with a long and disturbing criminal record. The young man was prone to violence and had repeatedly attacked women. Detectives swiftly obtained a search warrant for Andre Melton's home, along with an arrest warrant for burglary. When law enforcement officers arrived at the address, however, Andre was nowhere to be found. It appeared he had fled the scene, evading capture for the time being. Despite his absence, investigators conducted a thorough search of his home. During the operation, they uncovered most of the stolen items from Christina's apartment. But the police were no longer worried about this. It was necessary to detain the dangerous criminal and prove his involvement in the murder. Around this time, the autopsy report was finalized, and its findings were even more gruesome than anticipated. The medical examiner's report detailed the horrifying extent of Christina's injuries. 22 facial bones were broken. Areas not shattered or crushed were covered with deep bruising from the violent beating she had endured. As the police continued to comb through hours of surveillance footage, a shocking new discovery came to light. In additional footage from the night before Christina's murder, another man appeared alongside her. At approximately 3 a.m., Christina was captured on camera entering her apartment building in the company of an unidentified stranger. The man, also African American, and seemingly around the same age as Andre Melton, bore no resemblance to the taxi driver who had previously robbed her. The footage showed both Christina and the stranger entering the building, but curiously, there was no evidence of the man leaving through the front entrance. This anomaly triggered further investigation, and detectives soon discovered a suspicious activity log from the building's security system. At precisely 5:20 a.m., The balcony doors in Christina's apartment registered as having been opened and then closed. Because Christina and Alex's unit was located on the first floor, it was entirely plausible that the stranger had slipped out undetected through the balcony. With this information, police placed the man on the wanted list. The operation gained significant traction due to the high-quality surveillance footage, which allowed for an incredibly detailed image of the suspect's face. Investigators disseminated the footage widely through media outlets, urging the public to provide any information that could help identify and locate the man. The public appeal yielded results faster than anticipated. On August 22, a breakthrough occurred when Andre Melton himself made a shocking call to the police station. Seeing his own photo plastered across television screens alongside the image of the unidentified suspect, Andre felt compelled to clarify his involvement. Over the phone, he admitted to having robbed Christina on August 18th, but vehemently denied any connection to her murder. Andre insisted that while he had stolen from her apartment after substances her, he had not killed her. Despite his confession to burglary, Andre refused to surrender to authorities, fearing he would be falsely charged with the far graver crime of murder. The investigation took another turn when another taxi driver approached the police with crucial information. The driver claimed that shortly before Christina's tragic death, he had picked her up along with an African-American man matching the description of the wanted suspect. According to the driver, Christina had flagged him down on the road rather than hailing a ride through an app. This detail immediately struck investigators as significant. It suggested Christina may have been deliberately trying to avoid leaving a digital trail. The taxi driver recalled that Christina appeared visibly anxious during the ride. She explained to him that a group of men had been harassing her on the street, and the stranger had intervened to defend her. Christina, seemingly grateful, asked the man to accompany her home. During the ride, the stranger behaved calmly, even assuring the driver that he would pay for the trip upon arrival and leave a $100 tip if the driver waited outside for 15 minutes. While the arrangement seemed odd, the driver agreed to it. Once they arrived at the apartment, Christina and the man entered the building, and the driver waited outside as instructed. 15 minutes passed, then 30. No one returned, and the promised payment never materialized. Frustrated and realizing he had been deceived, the driver eventually left without further action. Despite his irritation, he remembered the details clearly, and his account added a critical piece to the puzzle. The case took yet another dramatic twist on October 26th, when police received a report from a new witness. This individual, a former patient at a psychiatric hospital, recognized the wanted second man's photo in the news. He explained to detectives that he had briefly shared a ward with the suspect just days before Christina's murder. The man, described as highly aggressive and prone to violent outbursts, had been admitted to the psychiatric facility after attacking a woman. The aggressive man was kept in a psychiatric hospital for 3 days. According to the witness, an unnervingly disturbing conversation took place during his brief time with the suspect while they shared a psychiatric ward. The man described how the stranger openly and chillingly confessed to having killed a woman before. With a twisted sense of satisfaction, he recounted how he enjoyed strangling his victims, expressing with terrifying delight that there was no better feeling than the convulsions of a body taking its final breaths. The casual, almost euphoric way he spoke about murder horrified the witness, who became convinced that this deranged individual was responsible for Christina's death. He told police with confidence that the man he had been confined with had been at the victim's house the night she was killed. This critical statement was a significant break for investigators. The police immediately visited the psychiatric clinic to identify the mysterious patient, hoping this would provide the missing link to solve the case. However, their hopes were quickly dashed. When they requested the man's records, they were stunned to discover that the suspect had given a false name: John Doe. The clinic had not only released a deeply dangerous man with a clear inclination for violence, but had also failed to establish his real identity. The revelation sent shockwaves through law enforcement, highlighting serious violations in the hospital's protocols and raising questions about how such a person had been allowed to walk free. For a brief moment, it felt as though the investigation had hit yet another dead end. Leads were running dry, and detectives were left grappling with the elusive nature of their suspect. However, on August 29th, a significant breakthrough occurred and it came on the same day as Christina's funeral. As her friends and family mourned the tragic loss of the 36-year-old model, a man approached the police with an important piece of information. He confessed to being related to the suspects seen in the surveillance footage and provided the police with information. The man's name was Jonathan Wesley Harris, a 31-year-old career criminal and known substances dealer who had only recently been released from prison after serving time for a particularly serious offense. While the relative could not confirm Jonathan Wesley's exact whereabouts, the police now had a name and a face to work with. Investigators wasted no time reaching out to anyone who might have had contact with Jonathan Wesley. After several calls, they managed to speak with Jonathan's sister. Reluctantly, she revealed that Jonathan Wesley had fled Philadelphia and was heading to Pittsburgh by bus. This information triggered an urgent response from law enforcement. Detectives alerted their counterparts in Pittsburgh, warning them that a dangerous fugitive was heading their way. The Pittsburgh police acted swiftly, coordinating patrols and deploying officers to the city's main bus station. The area was secured and surrounded in anticipation of Jonathan Wesley's arrival. When the bus finally pulled in, law enforcement officers were ready. Passengers began disembarking one by one. Jonathan Wesley, the prime suspect, was the third person to step off the bus. He barely had time to react before he was surrounded, apprehended, and escorted into custody. The manhunt had finally ended. Inside the interrogation room, Jonathan Wesley appeared calm at first. When detectives presented him with a photograph of Christina Kraft, he admitted to knowing her. According to Jonathan Wesley, they had met in a bar on the night of August 17th. He claimed the two struck up an easy conversation, fueled by alcohol and substances, which eventually led them to leave the bar together. In his version of events, Jonathan Wesley offered Christina substances he had purchased that evening, under the expectation that she would repay him through intimate favors. Jonathan Wesley insisted that Christina had willingly, voluntarily agreed to go to her home, and that the two traveled to her apartment in a taxi together. Jonathan Wesley's story later started to change. He alleged that once they arrived at Christina's apartment, she reneged on the deal. When he demanded $1,200 as payment for the substances he had provided, Christina refused, claiming she never asked for the substances in the first place. According to Jonathan Wesley, this disagreement led to a heated verbal argument. Christina allegedly became aggressive, grabbing a bottle of wine and striking Jonathan Wesley on the head, which left him bleeding. Jonathan Wesley claimed that in confusion and anger, he retaliated by hitting Christina back and then carried her to the bedroom. There, Christina Kraft began to regain consciousness. Dazed and disoriented, her senses sharpened just enough to recognize the immediate danger she was in, and she screamed for help. The sudden sound sent Jonathan Wesley into a panic. He realized that Christina's cries could alert neighbors or, worse, bring the police to her door. Already consumed by fear of legal consequences, Jonathan Wesley grew more erratic. His primal instincts took over, and in his agitated state, he decided he had to silence her. When Christina resisted his attempts to subdue her, Jonathan's frustration escalated into violence. Desperate to stop her from fighting back, he tied her wrists tightly and anchored her to the bed, rendering her defenseless. He claimed to have calmed down, at least for a fleeting moment, and assured Christina that he would untie her and leave peacefully if she stopped screaming. Christina agreed, but it was a deception. As soon as she was freed, she immediately rushed to the door. But Jonathan Wesley was faster. He caught her before she could escape and dragged her back to the bedroom. Rage consumed him. He forced her onto the bed, his fists raining down with relentless fury. Each blow landed harder than the last, driven by a toxic mix of panic, anger, and sadistic violence. Jonathan repeatedly screamed for Christina to be quiet, as though blaming her for his own uncontrollable actions. But Christina fought until her body could no longer endure. Jonathan stopped only when the room fell disturbingly still. Jonathan admitted that at this point, he realized Christina's breathing had become irregular, shallow, strained, and unnatural. Panic gripped him again. Though his brutal attack had rendered Christina near lifeless, he was suddenly terrified of what he had done. Jonathan claimed that he turned her over, trying to assess if she was conscious, and she weakly asked him for her phone. According to his statement, she pleaded to call her father for help. Jonathan handed her the device, But when he saw her attempting to dial 911 instead, he snapped. In his paranoia and desperation to escape responsibility, Jonathan lunged at her again, strangling her with his bare hands. He claimed he only wanted to render her unconscious and make her stop, but his actions were fatal. He insisted that when he stopped, Christina was still alive, a weak, self-serving attempt to minimize his responsibility. Unable to look at the horrific damage he had inflicted, Jonathan covered Christina's battered body with a sheet. In a final, calculated move, he rummaged through the apartment for valuables, not for any substantial gain, but to fund his escape. He stole several items of clothing to change out of his blood-stained outfit and left the apartment through the balcony, ensuring he avoided detection by the building's main entrance. Despite the graphic brutality of the attack, Jonathan later insisted that Christina's death had not been intentional. He blamed his violent outburst on alcohol, substances, and the events of the night spiraling out of control. His legal team, seeking to mitigate the severity of the charges, argued for manslaughter rather than murder. The prosecution, however, systematically dismantled Jonathan's defense. They pointed to his chilling confession in the psychiatric ward, where he had gleefully spoken about the pleasure he derived from strangling victims. This admission, combined with the calculated nature of the attack, painted a clear picture of intentional and sadistic violence. Furthermore, forensic evidence undermined Jonathan's claims. The toxicology report revealed no substances in Christina's system, only alcohol, debunking his assertion that she used illegal substances. Additionally, the absence of injuries to Jonathan's head contradicted his story that Christina had hit him with a wine bottle in self-defense. The prosecution's closing arguments were damning. Even if Jonathan's Wesley version of events were taken at face value, they argued, nothing justified the ferocity of his attack. Ultimately, the jury agreed with the prosecution. Jonathan Wesley Harris was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, escape, theft. The judge delivered a harsh, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder, plus an additional 22.5 years for the related charges. Robber Andre Melton, who attacked Christina 4 days before her death, was detained in December 2018. Andre Melton received a considerable term for his actions. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, a seemingly routine day turned into a nightmare at a boarding school dormitory. As dawn broke, a staff member performing routine rounds made a discovery that would shake the entire community. In the stairwell of the girls' residence, they found the lifeless body of Charnel Howe hanging near the metal railing. But the tragedy did not end there. Within minutes of the initial discovery, responding police found a second victim. Marna Engelbrecht, Charnel's best friend, was also discovered dead under equally distressing circumstances. At first glance, the situation appeared to be an unthinkable double tragedy, a shocking and heartbreaking loss of 2 young lives. However, as the investigation unfolded, subtle yet troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. Today we're diving into a true crime case that happened to Charnel Howe, who was born in South Africa in 2002. She grew up in a small, close-knit community where her childhood was surrounded by the love and care of her family. Her upbringing was marked by warmth and encouragement, fostering her naturally curious and vibrant personality. Charnel lived on a sprawling farm in Delville, a quaint and tranquil town nestled in the northwest province of South Africa. The region, known for its scenic savannas and vast shrublands, thrived on agriculture, with most residents depending on farming for their livelihoods. Charnel's father, Ronnie, was a dedicated cattle farmer, managing the family farm with unwavering diligence. Her stepmother, Anna, played a significant role in the household, overseeing daily chores while raising her son, Eston, whom Charnel affectionately regarded as her brother. Despite being part of a blended family, Charnel's relationships with her family members were deeply rooted in mutual respect and care. Charnel's parents had divorced when she was quite young, but the separation was amicable, leaving no room for resentment. Her mother, Sonia, worked at a tourism lodge in a nearby resort area, and Charnel divided her time between her parents' homes before enrolling at Stella boarding school. She would typically spend 3 weeks with her father on the farm, basking in the familiar rhythms of rural life, and 1 week with her mother, immersing herself in the hustle and bustle of the resort town. However, her visits to her mother's home grew less frequent once she started at Stella boarding school. The school, located in a small town far removed from her farm life, represented a significant transition, one that brought newfound independence, but also a sense of disconnection from her earlier routine. It was during this period of adjustment that Charnel experienced an unexpected and joyous reunion with Marna Engelbrecht, her childhood friend. Marna Engelbrecht was also born in South Africa in 2001. She grew up in a supportive and loving family that nurtured her bright and compassionate nature. The two girls had been inseparable during their early years, their bond forged in the innocence of kindergarten and strengthened by the deep ties between their families. Marna's mother, Rionette, had even performed music at Charnel's parents' wedding, a testament to the long-standing connection between the two households. Both families, deeply entrenched in the farming traditions of the Northwest Province, frequently crossed paths at Sunday church services, local community events, and agricultural gatherings. However, life circumstances had pulled the girls apart when Charnel moved, causing their friendship to fade. 8 years later, fate intervened, and the two were brought back together at Stella Boarding School. The boarding school environment became a pivotal chapter in Charnel's life. It was a world far removed from the familiarity of the farm, filled with new challenges and opportunities. Her father, Ronnie, remained consumed by the demands of managing the farm, while her mother's distant residence meant she could no longer be a constant presence in Charnel's daily life. In this context, Marna's friendship became an indispensable source of support and comfort for Charnel. The two shared a dorm room and spent most of their free time together, rekindling their bond over shared interests and memories. Charnel's charisma and Marna's intelligence complemented each other perfectly, and they quickly became known as an inseparable duo within the school community. Charnel's days were filled with horseback riding and her growing passion for photography, a hobby she nurtured with dreams of turning it into a career. Her father, however, saw her potential in a different light, frequently encouraging her to consider modeling. Marna, on the other hand, was a diligent student with a natural aptitude for math and science. Inspired by her experiences on her family's farm, she harbored aspirations of becoming a veterinarian. Her nickname, Marna Thinker, given by her father Stefan, reflected her calm, thoughtful nature. Stefan, a respected drilling specialist, shared a close bond with his younger daughter, often marveling at her insights. Marna's mother, Renette, worked as a compassionate caregiver, while her older sister, Rion, played a significant role in maintaining the family's harmony. The Engelbrecht family was well regarded in the community for their warmth and close-knit relationships. The Stella School's close-knit environment provided the perfect backdrop for Charnel and Marna to rekindle their friendship. Their shared love for animals and the outdoors often led to adventures on horseback, where they would explore the vast landscapes surrounding the school and their homes. In March 2017, Charnel's world took an unexpected turn when she first noticed Xander, a striking 18-year-old who had graduated from Stella Boarding School the previous year. With his athletic build, thick dark hair, and piercing green eyes, Xander exuded confidence and charm, making him an enigmatic figure in the small town. Although Charnel was still a student, Xander's frequent visits to the school and its surrounding areas kept him connected to the local community. His family's history was as complex as it was intriguing. His parents, Monty and Mersha, had divorced during his early childhood, leading him to grow up primarily on his father's farm, located about 50 miles from Stella. While Xander maintained a cordial relationship with his mother, their bond was less close compared to his relationship with his father. Before Xander's arrival in Charnel's life, her days at Stella Boarding School were marked by the shared interests and dreams she nurtured with Marna. Together, they envisioned futures that intertwined their passions with their rural upbringing. On weekends, they often returned to their respective homes but occasionally stayed with each other's families. Ronnie, Charnel's father, treated Marna as if she were his own daughter, and both families shared warm and supportive ties. On the surface, their lives appeared idyllic, filled with laughter, companionship, and dreams for the future. However, beneath this facade of happiness, a complex and darker reality lurked, threatening to upend their worlds. Xander, who had recently entered Charnel's life, was a young man carrying the heavy weight of a troubled past. His outward confidence and charm masked a childhood marked by the emotional fallout of his parents' divorce and the challenges that followed. Xander's mother, Mersha, viewed him as a miracle child. After enduring years of heartbreak and multiple struggles to conceive, she finally gave birth to Xander following a difficult pregnancy fraught with complications. His early health challenges only deepened Mersha's love and devotion, making her a fiercely protective and doting mother. Her protective nature remained strong even as Xander grew older, influencing his perception of relationships and boundaries. In stark contrast to his mother's nurturing approach, Xander's father, Monty, a stern and disciplined former police officer, raised him with a tough love philosophy. From a young age, Monty introduced Xander to sports, hunting, and outdoor activities, emphasizing self-reliance and physical toughness. Fishing trips, shooting practice, and treks into the forest became staples of their father-son bond. Xander excelled in sports, particularly rugby, where his athletic prowess shone, but his fiery temper and combative personality often overshadowed his achievements. He frequently clashed with teachers, classmates, and even adults, earning a reputation for his unpredictable and confrontational nature. School meetings to address his behavior became routine, with Mersha unwaveringly defending her son, insisting that his actions were simply expressions of individuality. After graduating from high school, Xander chose not to pursue further education, opting instead to assist his father on the family farm. His social media presence was sparse, limited mainly to posts showcasing firearms, hunting trophies, and outdoor escapades, painting a picture of a private yet rugged individual. Despite his low-profile lifestyle, Xander's natural charisma and striking good looks drew attention, particularly from young women who found his enigmatic persona alluring. It was at a school event that Charnel first encountered Xander. Alumni, including Xander, were invited to interact with current students and share their experiences. Their initial meeting was brief but charged with mutual intrigue. Xander's confidence, athletic build, and captivating charm left a lasting impression on Charnel. Soon after, they began spending time together, and their relationship blossomed at a rapid pace. In the early days, Xander was attentive and affectionate, going out of his way to make Charnel feel special and valued. His gestures of devotion, though overwhelming at times, were interpreted by Charnel as signs of his deep love for her. When the time came for Xander to meet Charnel's family, he approached the occasion with eagerness and determination to impress. Ronnie, initially wary of the young man's intentions, soon found common ground with Xander over their shared interest in farming. Xander's willingness to help out on the farm, combined with his polite demeanor, gradually won Ronnie's approval. These early interactions painted a picture of harmony and compatibility, but beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, warning signs about Xander's temperament began to emerge. Marna, Charnel's closest friend, was the first to notice subtle changes in her friend's behavior. The once inseparable pair now seemed to drift apart. Charnel, who had always been open and engaging, began to withdraw, frequently avoiding conversations and making excuses to skip their usual outings. At first, Marna attributed these changes to the excitement and demands of a new relationship, but as time passed, the distance grew more pronounced. Charnel's excuses for her absence often revolved around being too busy or too tired, explanations that rang hollow to Marna, who suspected a deeper issue. It became increasingly evident that these changes were linked to Xander's growing presence in Charnel's life. Initially, Xander's control manifested subtly. He would casually inquire about Charnel's plans, ask who she was spending time with, and show an intense interest in her daily activities. However, over time, his demands escalated. Xander began insisting on access to Charnel's phone, social media accounts, and personal messages, framing his requests as a need for transparency and trust in their relationship. Unaware of the underlying possessiveness, Charnel complied, believing his jealousy was a reflection of his strong feelings for her. The situation came to a head during preparations for prom, a milestone event that should have been filled with excitement and joy. Charnel, accompanied by her mother Sonia, embarked on a shopping trip to find the perfect dress. However, the lighthearted outing quickly turned tense when Xander inserted himself into the process. He insisted on approving her choice of dress and dictated specific details about her appearance, such as wearing minimal makeup and styling her hair in a manner he deemed acceptable. Although Charnel yearned to assert herself, she ultimately acquiesced to his demands, fearing the conflict that would ensue if she resisted. Later, she confided in a few close friends about feeling uneasy with his behavior, but still didn't fully comprehend the growing gravity of the situation. Xander's controlling tendencies did not stop there. They continued to escalate over time. His interference in her friendships became more overt and hostile. He openly expressed disdain for anyone he deemed a bad influence, creating an atmosphere of tension and fear. If Charnel spent time with friends, he demanded detailed explanations about where she went, who she was with, and what they discussed. These incessant inquiries wore her down, and she gradually started to avoid social interactions altogether to minimize arguments. Even her bond with Marna, her closest and most trusted friend, began to suffer. Their once frequent meetings became rare, and when Marna tried to confront Charnel about Xander's behavior, Charnel dismissed her concerns, rationalizing his actions as part of his personality. She convinced herself and others that these challenges were temporary and that Xander would eventually change. However, instead of improving, his control grew more oppressive, and his behavior became alarmingly aggressive. Even during family dinners with Xander's relatives, Charnel noticed how closely he monitored her words and actions. Initially, her family, including her father, Ronnie, and stepmother Anna, had approved of the relationship, perceiving Xander as polite and hardworking. However, as months passed, they began to see subtle but troubling changes in Charnel's demeanor. Once confident, she appeared increasingly withdrawn and subdued. Ronnie and Anna attributed these changes to academic stress, unaware of the deeper issue at play. Only Marna recognized the warning signs and attempted to reach out, but Xander's influence had already created a wall of isolation around Charnel. By January 2018, Charnel Hauff had reached her breaking point. After enduring months of Xander's controlling and aggressive behavior, she decided to end the relationship. This decision had been building over time, fueled by a growing awareness of how unhealthy and damaging his actions were. By the end of the previous year, her family and friends had noticed the toll the relationship was taking on her. Xander's constant monitoring of her phone and social media, as well as the heated arguments that often escalated into physical confrontations, had raised alarm among those close to her. Occasionally, bruises or marks would appear on Charnel's body after these altercations, prompting concern from her best friend Marna, who implored her to leave him. The final straw came when Charnel realized that staying in the relationship would only further erode her sense of self. The breakup triggered an extreme and alarming reaction from Xander. He began bombarding Charnel with messages, threatening to harm himself and claiming he couldn't live without her. These emotionally manipulative tactics were designed to make her reconsider her decision. Despite the immense stress this caused, Charnel remained resolute. For the first time, she stood firm in her decision, determined to leave the toxic relationship behind. During this tumultuous period, Marna became entangled in the conflict. Xander accused her of turning Charnel against him and began sending her a series of insulting and threatening messages. Alarmed by the escalation, Marna confided in her father, Stefan, who immediately took action. Stefan confronted Xander directly, demanding that he cease his harassment of Marna. While this intervention temporarily de-escalated the situation, Xander's hostility didn't disappear entirely. His anger simmered beneath the surface, creating an ever-present sense of unease. A few months after the breakup, Charnel found solace in an old friend, Brandon Victor. She had known Brandon since she was 14, and their friendship had always been marked by mutual respect and kindness. Brandon, a high school senior with an excellent reputation, was known for his athletic accomplishments and compassionate nature. He became a source of emotional support for Charnel during this challenging time. Brandon listened to her concerns, offered encouragement, and helped her rebuild her confidence after the trauma of her relationship with Xander. Over time, their friendship deepened into a closer bond, and they began to develop feelings for one another. Aware of Xander's lingering obsession with Charnel, they decided to keep their relationship private to avoid provoking him further. May 2018 marked a turning point in the unfolding tragedy surrounding Charnel Hauff. Despite her best efforts to reclaim her peace of mind and move forward, she could not escape the oppressive shadow of Xander's persistent interference. His refusal to accept the end of their relationship and his ongoing attempts to insert himself into her life created a tense and increasingly volatile atmosphere. The mounting pressure began to take a toll not only on Charnel, but also on those closest to her, setting the stage for a series of events that would change everything. Early on the morning of May 26, 2018, an eerie and unnatural stillness permeated the corridors of the boarding school dormitory. Christelle, one of the dormitory caretakers, began her routine rounds at approximately 6 a.m., moving through the quiet hallways to ensure students were awake. As she neared the restroom, something unusual caught her attention. dark strands of hair scattered on the floor. At first, she dismissed the sight, assuming it was leftover hair from brushing or a harmless prank. However, as she made her way toward the staircase leading to the ground floor, a more disturbing scene began to unfold. There, tied tightly across the railing, was a green nylon rope. Moments later, dormitory caretaker world froze as she looked up and saw a pair of feet clad in white socks dangling above the floor. Unbeknownst to Christelle, dormitory caretaker, a chain of chilling events had already been set in motion hours earlier. At approximately 4:17 a.m., Sonia, Charnel's mother, was abruptly awakened at her home by the chime of her phone. The message on her screen was brief but deeply unsettling. "Mom, I just wanted to say I love you and I'm sorry." What struck Sonia most was the misspelling of the word sorry, as Charnel had always been meticulous about her grammar. Alarm bells rang in Sonia's mind. She immediately tried calling her daughter, but the call went straight to voicemail. Overcome with worry, Sonia reached out to Ronnie, her ex-husband, to ask if he had heard from Charnel. Groggy from being awakened, Ronnie reassured her that everything had seemed normal the night before. However, he decided to check his phone for any missed messages. His heart sank as he found two unsettling texts from Charnel. The first, sent at 3:42 a.m., included a photo of Charnel in her undergarments with the caption, "I love you, Brandon." The second, sent at 4:17 a.m., read, "Dad, I'm sorry. Marna and I are leaving." The cryptic and ominous nature of the messages filled Ronnie with dread. At the same time, Christelle, dormitory caretaker piecing together the gravity of what she had seen, hurried upstairs to Charnel and Marna's shared dormitory room. To her shock, the room was eerily tidy, with the girls' belongings neatly arranged, as though they had been preparing for a regular day. There were no signs of a struggle or distress, but the absence of the girls confirmed Christelle's worst fears. Realizing the situation was far more dire than she had initially thought, she returned to the staircase where the horrifying sight of the rope still loomed. Meanwhile, Charnel's troubling messages were beginning to reach others. Brandon, her boyfriend, received a late-night text that left him confused and alarmed. His immediate attempts to call her went unanswered. Though unsure of what was happening, Brandon felt an intense foreboding, as if something terrible was about to unfold. What should have been a routine morning filled with preparations for a rugby match quickly descended into chaos. Early that same morning, head teacher Richard Hobson received a frantic phone call from Christelle, dormitory caretaker. Her voice trembled with panic as she described finding Charnel's lifeless body hanging from the staircase railing in the dormitory building. Stunned and struggling to process the information, Hobson tried to gather more details, but the call abruptly ended as Christelle dropped the phone and ran to find additional help. As news of the tragedy began to filter out, Ronnie received a devastating call from the principal. The message was brief but heartbreaking. Both Charnel and her best friend, Marna Engelbrecht, had been found dead. Overwhelmed with grief and desperate for clarity, Ronnie immediately contacted his brother Louis to accompany him to the school. As they drove toward the school, Ronnie's mind raced with the strange, cryptic late-night messages he had received from his daughter. His heart was heavy with dread, unable to reconcile the words on his phone with the horrifying events now unfolding. Beside him, Louis remained silent, his own expression grim as they braced themselves for the unknown. At the school, chaos reigned despite the valiant efforts of Principal Hobson and his staff to shield the students from the unfolding nightmare. Whispers of tragedy spread like wildfire, the weight of the situation impossible to contain. Attempts to maintain a semblance of normalcy crumbled as grim reality took hold. By the time the police arrived later that morning, the scene had taken an even darker turn. What they initially believed to be a single devastating loss revealed itself to be far more harrowing. Marna's lifeless body was discovered in the first-floor bathroom, her neck encircled by a strap from a school backpack. Early police assumptions leaned toward the possibility of a tragic suicide pact between the two girls. But as investigators meticulously examined the scene, troubling inconsistencies began to emerge. The markings on the girls' necks didn't align with typical indicators of self-inflicted harm. The positions of the bodies, the materials used, and the lack of any suicide notes. elements often present in such cases, raised more questions than answers. The growing evidence hinted at a sinister undercurrent, and suspicions of foul play steadily gained traction. Ronnie arrived at the school shortly after the police, his already fragile composure crumbling as he caught sight of his daughter's lifeless form. Ignoring the warnings of officers who urged him not to disturb the scene, Ronnie pushed past them, his grief transforming into desperate denial. He reached for Charnel, overcome by an instinctive need to protect her, even in death. It took the combined efforts of Lewis and several officers to prevent Ronnie from collapsing entirely. Meanwhile, Marna's father, Stevens, arrived and was consumed by a volatile mix of rage and sorrow. Upon learning of his daughter's fate, his anguish quickly turned to suspicion, and he didn't hesitate to openly accuse Xander, Charnel's ex-boyfriend, of involvement in the tragedy. As tensions escalated, Principal Hobson recognized the need for swift and decisive action. Turning to someone he trusted, he contacted Chris Sanders, a seasoned private investigator renowned for his meticulous and methodical approach to solving complex cases. Sanders arrived within hours, his reputation preceding him as he stepped into the chaotic scene. His first move was to interview Brandon Victor, Charnel's current boyfriend, who had been visibly shaken by the news. Brandon disclosed that Xander, Charnel's ex-boyfriend, had remained fixated on her, often making veiled threats and attempting to interfere in her life after their breakup. This revelation added weight to the growing suspicion surrounding Xander. Meanwhile, the investigation at the crime scene continued to uncover critical pieces of evidence. The green nylon rope used on the staircase and the backpack strap around Marna's neck were carefully collected, each item meticulously bagged and sent for forensic analysis. Fingerprints and DNA samples became the linchpin of the investigation as the team sought to reconstruct the events leading up to the tragedy. Xander's name repeatedly surfaced during interviews with students and staff, painting him as a figure who could no longer be ignored. While the police worked tirelessly to gather evidence, the emotional toll on the families became increasingly evident. Stevens, Marna's father, grew frustrated with the pace of the investigation. Consumed by his need for answers, he decided to confront Xander directly. Driving to Xander's home in a fit of rage, Stevens demanded the truth. The confrontation quickly escalated into a volatile altercation. Xander's father, Monty, attempted to mediate, but the heated exchange spiraled further out of control until Chris Sanders arrived on the scene. His presence, calm yet authoritative, diffused the situation before it could erupt into violence. As Sanders delved deeper into the events of May 25, 2018, the timeline began to crystallize. Around midnight, Charnel, Marna, and Brandon had gathered in the girls' dormitory room. Despite the school's strict rules, Brandon had managed to sneak in, eager to spend time with Charnel. The three of them had spent hours talking, sharing laughs, and discussing their plans for the future. But as the night wore on, a subtle tension seemed to creep into the room. Around 2 a.m., Brandon reluctantly left, blissfully unaware that it would be the last time he saw either girl alive. By the following morning, the tragic news had spread across the school and the wider community, leaving Brandon devastated. Racked with guilt, he replayed the night's events over and over in his mind, questioning if there had been any signs he had missed, anything he could have done differently to prevent this outcome. Meanwhile, Stephen's confrontation with Xander further escalated the already volatile situation. Xander denied any involvement, but his defensive and erratic behavior only deepened suspicions. Displaying a calm yet authoritative demeanor, Chris Sanders managed to de-escalate the heated confrontation between Stevens and Xander. With careful negotiation, Sanders convinced Stevens to step back and persuaded Xander to accompany him voluntarily to the police station. Despite Xander's initial resistance, Sanders' composed yet firm approach left little room for argument. On the drive to the station, Sanders began subtly probing Xander, employing a methodical questioning technique designed to apply steady psychological pressure. Xander, unable to maintain his composure under Sanders' relentless yet composed questioning, eventually broke down and confessed to the crimes. In a shocking admission, Xander revealed that he had murdered Charnel out of jealousy and rage, unable to accept her moving on with Brandon. Marna, he admitted, had been killed because she was a witness to his actions and might have exposed him. Sanders, always prepared, recorded the confession using a discreet voice recorder to ensure the evidence was preserved. Meanwhile, at the crime scene, police investigators meticulously combed the area for evidence. The physical marks on the girls' bodies and the positioning of the crime scene contradicted the initial theory of voluntary acts, aligning instead with foul play. Xander's confession confirmed these suspicions, providing investigators with crucial details that painted a clear and harrowing picture of his premeditated actions. Once they arrived at the station, Xander's confession continued under formal questioning. He chillingly detailed how he had planned the crimes, intending to make them appear as voluntary acts to avoid suspicion. He described sneaking into the dormitory under the cover of darkness and executing his plan with calculated precision. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered disturbing evidence of Xander's obsessive behavior. His phone contained hundreds of messages, photos, and journal entries centered on Charnel, many of which displayed an unhealthy fixation. These records painted a disturbing portrait of a man consumed by jealousy and unable to accept rejection. The case reached its climactic moment during Xander's trial in March 2019. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution presented a meticulously constructed narrative of the events leading up to the murders. One of the most impactful testimonies came from Anastasia Fesser, an acquaintance of Xander's from fishing competitions. Anastasia recounted a phone call she had received from Xander the day before the tragedy. During the conversation, Xander angrily declared that he would not let Charnel live her life without him. His chilling words, a direct warning of his intentions, were etched into Anastasia's memory. At the time, she had dismissed his statement as an emotional outburst, never imagining the catastrophic outcome that would follow. Her testimony became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case, highlighting the premeditated nature of Xander's actions and his obsessive state of mind. Another pivotal moment came when Brandon Victor, Charnel's new boyfriend, took the stand. Brandon recounted the events of May 24, 2018, the night before the tragedy. Despite strict school rules, he had sneaked into the girls' dormitory to comfort Charnel, who was visibly distressed by the escalating threats from Xander. Brandon described how they had spent the evening talking, laughing, and trying to alleviate the tension. However, their moment of solace was interrupted by a phone call from Xander. Charnel, trying to remain composed, answered the call on speaker so that Brandon and Marna could hear. Xander's tone shifted from pleading to menacing, ending with a chilling threat. "You'll regret what I'm going to do tonight." Charnel was shaken but insisted that Brandon leave to avoid punishment if his presence was discovered. This marked the last time Brandon saw Charnel and Marna alive. The defense's attempts to challenge the validity of the evidence were systematically dismantled. They argued that Xander's confession had been coerced, but the testimony of private investigator Sanders, coupled with the recorded statements, rendered this claim baseless. Psychological evaluations presented during the trial described Xander as emotionally unstable, with a pathological fixation on Charnel. Experts testified that his inability to cope with rejection, combined with his obsessive need for control, had driven him to commit the heinous acts. The role of Xander's family came under scrutiny during the trial. His mother, known for her overprotective nature, had consistently dismissed signs of concerning behavior throughout his upbringing. While Xander's father, Monty, initially acknowledged his son's guilt and called for justice, his stance shifted dramatically after the sentencing. Xander Bilesma was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms, a verdict that Monty later labeled as unjust. In an unexpected move, Monty hired a team of lawyers to appeal the conviction. For the families of Charnel and Marna, the trial's conclusion brought a mix of emotions. While the conviction provided a measure of justice, it could not erase the pain of their loss. In a poignant act of solidarity, Charnel and Marna, inseparable in life, were laid to rest beside each other. What began as an ordinary day quickly turned into something far more sinister. As the police approached the warehouse in question, they were immediately struck by a putrid, overpowering stench that hung heavy in the air. The moment the officers swung open the unit's doors, they were met with a profoundly disturbing sight. Scattered among various personal belongings were several large containers. Among them was a heavy-duty cooler, meticulously wrapped in layers of plastic, a large blue duffel bag, and a small carry-on suitcase. Following strict forensic protocols, crime scene investigators carefully removed each container from the unit. The containers were then transported to the medical examiner's office for further examination. The process of unwrapping and inspecting the contents took painstaking hours, as forensic specialists meticulously worked to preserve every possible shred of evidence hidden within the layers of plastic and fabric. As the final layers were peeled away, the horrifying truth was revealed. The body inside was officially identified as belonging to Maniji Starin. What started as a regular investigation has now turned into a true documentary. It will tell the story of Maniji Starin, who was born on May 23, 1989. There is little publicly available information about her early years, her upbringing, or the environment in which she was raised. It remains unclear whether she grew up in St. Paul, Ramsey County, Minnesota, or relocated there later in life. What is known is that by 2023, at the age of 34, Maniji was a single mother of 3 children, each from different fathers. She resided in a modest 2-bedroom apartment at 1428th Street in St. Paul, struggling to provide for her children while grappling with her own personal battles. Maniji's past relationships were shrouded in mystery, and there was no public record indicating whether she had ever been married. Acquaintances and those who had brief interactions with her painted a picture of a woman with an infectious warmth, someone whose kindness and patience left an impression on all who met her. Friends and neighbors recalled her as a person who always found time to smile, even in difficult times, and was known for her unwavering optimism despite the hardships she faced. Her love for her children was evident in the way she spoke about them, even as she privately battled an internal demon. Despite these admirable qualities, Maniji faced deep-seated personal struggles, including mental health issues and a battle with drug addiction. These challenges had begun to take a significant toll on her life and, most critically, on her ability to provide a stable and secure environment for her children. There were periods when she attempted to turn things around, seeking therapy and expressing a desire to attend a drug rehabilitation program, but her efforts often fell short, leaving those closest to her concerned about her well-being. Then came a turning point, an event that would set off a chain reaction of alarming developments. The phone call on May 1st, 2023. That morning, the St. Paul Police Department received a distress call from Maniji's father. His voice was filled with unease as he reported his daughter missing. Known to close family and friends as Manny, Maniji had last spoken to him on April 18, 2023. During their final conversation, she had seemed distraught, paranoid, and unusually afraid. She had mentioned being in fear of someone. Her father believed it was a boyfriend, but she refused to disclose details. What made matters worse was that she had failed to appear at rehabilitation center where she was scheduled to check in. This absence, coupled with her fearful demeanor, had led her father to believe something was seriously wrong. Responding to the urgency of the situation, officers immediately began searching for Maniji. Their first stop was her apartment, but there was no sign of her. No immediate evidence suggested forced entry or foul play, but her absence was troubling. Investigators then reached out to individuals connected to her, starting with the father of one of her children. When questioned, he revealed that he, too, had not heard from Maniji in an unusual amount of time. Typically, she made it a priority to stay in touch, especially concerning their child. He emphasized that it was extremely out of character for her to go more than 8 hours without contacting him, as she was meticulous about ensuring their child's well-being. Their last conversation had been on April 21st, 2023, but afterward, she had gone silent. The man also disclosed that she often reached out from different phone numbers, likely due to financial instability preventing her from maintaining a steady phone plan. Investigators then turned their attention to her neighbors. One neighbor, in particular, recounted a disturbing memory. She had seen Maniji with visible injuries, a black eye and red marks on her neck. Though the exact date of the sighting was unclear, the neighbor remembered the incident vividly. Concerned, she had approached Maniji and asked if she had been hurt. Hesitantly, Maniji had admitted that she had been assaulted. However, despite the neighbor's insistence that she report it to the authorities, Maniji had refused, fearing that involving the police would only escalate the situation. This revelation deepened the mystery, painting a picture of a woman trapped in a dangerous situation but too afraid to seek help. Further inquiries led detectives to the manager of the apartment complex where Maniji lived. The manager provided crucial information. Maniji had a boyfriend named Joe, who frequently visited her apartment, though he was not listed on the lease. The manager, sensing something troubling about the relationship, had kept mental notes of the man's presence. He then provided the investigators with a phone number associated with Joe. With this lead in hand, investigators quickly uncovered the identity behind the number, a 40-year-old man named Joseph Steve Jorgensson. Upon presenting a photograph of Jorgensson to the apartment manager, they received confirmation. This was indeed the man known as Joe, Maniji's boyfriend. This marked a significant development in the case. Investigators were now faced with the possibility that Joe had played a role in Maniji's disappearance. Just as investigators began piecing together a timeline, another breakthrough emerged, one that would change the course of the investigation. On May 24, 2023, the manager of a neighboring apartment complex contacted detectives with a crucial discovery. Surveillance footage from April 21, 2023 had been found. In the surveillance footage retrieved from the apartment complex, Maniji was seen stepping out of her apartment in visible distress. Her posture was tense, her movements hesitant, and her face bore an expression of fear. Just moments later, Jorgensson, her boyfriend, appeared on screen, following her with deliberate swiftness. What investigators saw in the footage sent a chill through them. The grainy video showed a Maniji engaged in what appeared to be a struggle near a dark-colored vehicle. The footage was not entirely clear, but the movement suggested distress. At one point, he seemed to forcefully pull her towards the vehicle. After this, he forcibly turned her around, gripping her by the arm and directing her back inside the apartment. The video confirmed that this was the last known sighting of Maniji entering her residence on that ominous evening, sometime between 5:55 and 6 p.m. Strangely, no further footage existed showing her leaving the premises afterward. Investigators meticulously reviewed additional surveillance recordings and unearthed an unsettling pattern. Between April 21, 2023, and April 28, 2023, Jorgensson was recorded entering and exiting Maniji's apartment multiple times. The shocking revelation came when authorities counted the exact number. Jorgensson had accessed the apartment an astonishing 28 times in just 1 week. This revelation prompted immediate concern. Why was he making so many visits? And why had Maniji not been seen since April 21st? To further compound the situation, apartment management confirmed a critical detail. Maniji possessed only one set of keys for her unit. Yet surveillance footage showed Jorgensson unlocking the door each time he entered, proving that he was in possession of a key. How he obtained it remained a pressing question, but its implications were chilling. As investigators continued piecing together the growing puzzle, the urgency of finding Maniji escalated. The next significant lead emerged from the security footage dated May 28, 2023. At exactly 4:55 p.m., Jorgensson was captured exiting the apartment carrying 2 duffel bags and a large suitcase. The grainy video showed him loading the bags into the back of a dark-colored pickup truck with a visible Minnesota license plate before climbing into the driver's seat and hastily driving away. Further inquiry into the truck's registration revealed that it was registered to a man living at an apartment complex on 89 Century Avenue in Maplewood. Investigators immediately sought out this individual, eager to uncover whether he had any connection to Jorgensson or knowledge of Maniji's whereabouts. Meanwhile, they pursued another promising lead, a family friend. When questioned, the family friend provided valuable insight into Maniji's habits. He stressed that despite her struggles with drug addiction and personal crises, she never went without contact with someone from her family or social circle. This made her sudden disappearance all the more alarming. The friend also recounted a troubling phone conversation he had with Jorgensson in the days following Maniji's last known appearance. According to him, Jorgensson claimed that Maniji had left for the store one day and never returned. Suspicion deepened further when Jorgensson attempted to shift blame onto another individual, a man named Cassell. He described Cassell as a menacing and suspicious character who might have harmed Maniji. However, the family friend found this assertion dubious, as Jorgensson had never previously mentioned this individual in connection with Maniji. Moreover, Jorgensson ceased all contact with the family friend after that phone call, refusing to answer any further inquiries about Maniji's disappearance. This behavior, combined with his failure to report her missing, further solidified investigators' suspicions. The overwhelming evidence pointed toward Jorgensson as a central figure in Maniji's vanishing. and authorities prepared to intensify their scrutiny of him. Determined to uncover the truth, officers obtained a warrant to conduct a thorough search of Maniji's apartment. Accompanied by the property manager, an officer entered the unit. The air inside was heavy with an eerie stillness, as if time had frozen in the wake of an untold tragedy. As they moved through the apartment, disturbing details began to emerge. Near a bedroom window, they found a window screen lying discarded on the floor. It had been removed with force, suggesting a possible struggle. In the living room, a large television sat against the wall with its screen shattered in multiple places. The property manager confirmed that the damage had not been present before Maniji's disappearance. In the kitchen, investigators discovered a microwave with a broken glass panel. Though it appeared that someone had attempted to clean up the shattered fragments, faint traces of debris were still visible. The most disturbing discovery, however, awaited them in Maniji's bedroom. The officers immediately noticed that the bedsheet had been partially removed, exposing a foam mattress pad beneath. But the mattress pad itself was not intact. Someone had deliberately cut out a large section of the foam. The missing piece raised alarming questions. What had been removed, and why? Even more unsettling, red stains were present at the foot of the bed. Though their origin had yet to be confirmed, the implications were deeply troubling. The shocking revelations only intensified the sense of urgency surrounding Maniji's mysterious disappearance, pushing investigators to dig deeper into a growing maze of disturbing clues and chilling events. Realizing the need for a comprehensive search, authorities meticulously followed legal protocols to secure a warrant that would allow them to conduct a forensic investigation of Maniji's apartment. The warrant was officially granted and executed on May 25, 2023. When crime scene technicians entered the residence, they were immediately confronted with a gruesome discovery. Large quantities of blood were found throughout the apartment, on the couch, pooled on the floor, and splattered across the kitchen area. Signs of a haphazard cleanup attempt were evident, suggesting that someone had desperately tried to erase any trace of what had transpired within the apartment's walls. The chilling reality set in. Someone had suffered a severe injury or had potentially lost their life inside that apartment. Subsequent forensic analysis confirmed investigators' worst fears. The blood samples collected matched none other than Maniji Starin herself. With this confirmation, the case transitioned from a missing persons investigation into something far darker, a potential homicide. As detectives pressed forward, they began examining Maniji's financial records in hopes of unearthing additional leads. It was soon revealed that she had been receiving government assistance through Minnesota's Electronic Benefits Transfer Program. This system allowed her to make food purchases and, in some cases, withdraw limited cash benefits. Recognizing the significance of this information, a warrant was quickly obtained to scrutinize Maniji's EBT account activity. What they found painted an even more unsettling picture. Despite Maniji being missing since April 21, 2023, transactions on her EBT card continued well into May. On May 9, 2023, Jorgensson used Maniji's EBT card to withdraw cash from an ATM at the Speedway located at 11 Century Avenue North in Maplewood. Later that same day, he utilized the card at a Dollar Tree store at Valley Creek Plaza in Woodbury. His purchases were notably suspicious: a cleaning bucket, 2 boxes, paper towels, garbage bags, liquid cleaner, latex gloves, and disinfectant wipes. The assortment of items raised immediate red flags, as they aligned with materials typically used to sanitize a crime scene. 2 days later, on May 11, 2023, Jorgensson made another transaction at the Cub Food store at Clarence Street in St. Paul, Ramsey County. His spending spree didn't end there. He also visited a separate Dollar Tree store at 10th Street North in Oakdale. Once again, his purchases included paper towels, additional boxes, and cleaning products, as well as more disinfectant wipes. The recurring purchase of cleaning supplies strongly suggested that Jorgensson was attempting to cover up a crime. Complicating the investigation further, authorities uncovered yet another disturbing piece of information. Another individual, identified only by the initials ZD, had also used Maniji's EBT card. This discovery expanded the scope of the case, raising questions about whether additional people were involved in Maniji's disappearance or if ZD was simply an unwitting participant. Investigators, now fully aware of Jorgensson's fraudulent activities, moved to obtain a search warrant for his account history. What they found was deeply incriminating. On April 21, 2023, the very day Maniji was last seen, Jorgensson searched for the term jugular, a chilling choice of words, hinting at knowledge of fatal injuries. On May 1, 2023, he searched, "What do police do with a missing persons report?" A query that suggested he was strategizing how to handle the fallout of Maniji's disappearance. On May 3, 2023, his searches shifted to digital self-preservation, how to clear cookies from an Android phone. Then, on May 27, 2023, he looked up, how to remove GPS from a Lime scooter. The search raised eyebrows. Was Jorgensson attempting to evade location tracking? Perhaps most unsettling of all, on June 4, 2023, Jorgensson searched for lime for soil. Investigators were well aware of the significance of this term. Lime is commonly used in soil treatments, but it is also notorious for its ability to accelerate decomposition and neutralize the odor of decaying organic matter. The implications were terrifying. With overwhelming evidence mounting against Jorgensson, law enforcement set their sights on his residence. A warrant was swiftly secured to search his apartment, and officers braced for what could be a volatile encounter. On June 26, 2023, a SWAT team was deployed to execute the search warrant. As they arrived at Jorgensson's apartment, tension ran high. The moment officers knocked and announced their presence, Jorgensson reacted with immediate defiance. Instead of complying, he rushed to his bedroom, barricading himself inside. In a shocking and terrifying escalation of events, to the horror of the SWAT officers and bystanders, Jorgensson set a fire inside his apartment, further intensifying the already volatile situation. The flames, fueled by his desperate resistance, sent thick smoke billowing through the confined space, raising the stakes for everyone inside. The SWAT team, understanding the gravity of the moment, acted with extreme caution as they moved in to subdue him. A fierce and chaotic struggle broke out, with Jorgensson fighting against the officers with alarming aggression. His resistance was ferocious. He clawed, kicked, and even attempted to wrestle a firearm from one of the officers, heightening the already immense danger. It took several officers to finally overpower him, bringing an end to the violent confrontation. Once restrained, Jorgensson was swiftly transported to Regions Hospital for an immediate medical evaluation. Law enforcement officials wanted to ensure that any potential injuries he sustained during his resistance were properly assessed. Additionally, authorities sought to evaluate his mental state, as his erratic behavior, combined with the brutal nature of the case, suggested the possibility of underlying mental health issues that could have played a role in his actions. To the officers' surprise, Jorgensson was not alone in the apartment. Two other individuals were present at the time of his arrest. One was an unidentified woman who bore disturbing signs of physical abuse. Her body was covered in multiple bruises and scratches, and deep red marks encircled her neck, indicating a history of strangulation. When questioned by police, the woman made a chilling revelation. Jorgensson had strangled her and, at one point, whispered threatening words in her ear. "The neighbors won't hear you scream." This unsettling statement painted a terrifying picture of the extent of Jorgensson's brutality. The second individual was Jorgensson's roommate, a man who had chosen to take refuge in his bedroom during the standoff with the SWAT team. The roommate did not resist when officers detained him. When later interviewed at the St. Paul Police Department, he revealed crucial insights into the environment inside the apartment. He disclosed that he suffered from a traumatic brain injury, which had rendered him without a sense of smell, a fact that later gained significance. Additionally, he described his limited interactions with Jorgensson, citing his demanding Monday through Friday work schedule as the reason for his minimal involvement in the activities of his roommate. He insisted that he had little knowledge of Jorgensson's frequent guests or illicit actions. As detectives continued to investigate, they turned their attention to another key figure, ZD, a close associate of Jorgensson. Investigators had previously observed ZD using Maniji's EBT card, which prompted them to call him in for questioning. During the interview, ZD revealed that he had only met Maniji once or twice and had no close relationship with her. When he inquired about her whereabouts, Jorgensson had told him that she had been admitted to a mental health facility. ZD also stated that Jorgensson had personally handed him Maniji's EBT card and provided him with the PIN, leading him to assume that Jorgensson had permission to use it. As officers continued their efforts to piece together Maniji's last known movements, they spoke with the apartment manager overseeing Jorgensson's residence. The manager recounted a disturbing series of events that had begun in mid-May. Around May 15 or 16, 2023, multiple residents began filing complaints about a revolting stench emanating from Jorgensson's apartment. It was kind of like, spoiled milk and a baby diaper mixed together. It was just a really strong, unbearable odor, the manager recalled. The stench was so overwhelming that it permeated the entire building, causing immense concern among the residents. Growing increasingly uneasy, the manager and a maintenance employee attempted to enter Jorgensson's apartment on May 18, 2023, to investigate the source of the odor. However, their efforts were met with aggressive hostility. Jorgensson verbally lashed out at them, refusing to allow them access. He physically blocked the entrance to a specific bedroom, one that, according to their observations, appeared to be the very source of the putrid smell. Suspicious but unwilling to escalate the situation further at the time, the manager informed Jorgensson and his roommate that they needed to clean the apartment within a week. Shortly after this encounter, the manager and the maintenance employee observed something that sent shivers down their spines. They witnessed Jorgensson struggling to carry and drag several large black duffel bags out of the apartment. The sight was so unnerving that they exchanged grim remarks about the possibility that Jorgensson might be disposing of a dead body. Their suspicions were enough to cement the belief that something truly sinister had occurred within that apartment. Acting on these revelations, the Forensic Services Unit of the St. Paul Police Department conducted an extensive search of Jorgensson's apartment. What they uncovered confirmed the investigators' darkest fears. Blood evidence was found in multiple locations, strengthening the growing belief that the case had taken a turn toward homicide. The most damning discovery was a large pool of blood in the front closet, precisely the area identified as the source of the foul odor. Investigators noted that the blood had seeped through the carpet and into the carpet pad beneath it. Additionally, blood was found in the closet where Jorgensson had attempted to start the fire, further indicating the extent of his desperate attempts to destroy evidence. Investigators meticulously documented the crime scene, noting the disturbing level of premeditation evident in his actions. As the forensic team expanded their search of the apartment, they uncovered 2 padlock keys hidden among Jorgensson's personal belongings. These keys would later prove to be a crucial link in unraveling the gruesome details of the case. A review of Jorgensson's phone records revealed a chilling discovery. On May 18, 2023, his phone had registered a location ping near a storage facility located at 881 Weir Drive in Woodbury. Further investigation uncovered that someone using Jorgensson's roommate's name had begun renting a storage unit at the facility on May 5, 2023. The access code assigned to this unit was used precisely at the same time that Jorgensson's phone had been detected in the area. The circumstantial evidence suggested that Jorgensson had likely used this unit to conceal additional incriminating evidence. Realizing the significance of this revelation, investigators moved swiftly to obtain a warrant to search the storage unit. On June 28, 2023, just 2 days after Jorgensson's arrest, law enforcement officers descended upon the storage facility. As they approached the designated unit, they were met with a putrid, overwhelming stench, one that seasoned investigators immediately recognized as the scent of decomposing flesh. One of the keys retrieved from Jorgensson's apartment appeared to match one of the padlocks securing the unit, but in the end, investigators had to resort to cutting both locks to gain access. The moment the unit's doors swung open, officers were confronted with a deeply unsettling sight. Inside, stacked among various personal items, were several large containers, a heavy-duty cooler wrapped meticulously in plastic, a blue duffel bag, and a small carry-on suitcase. The forensic team quickly noted that one of the bags closely matched the luggage Jorgensson had been captured on surveillance footage removing from Maniji's apartment weeks earlier. Additionally, resting atop the cooler, they discovered a green tote filled with cleaning supplies identical to those Jorgensson had previously purchased. The items included disinfectant wipes, rubber gloves, and rolls, the same type of plastic used to encase the body parts found in the containers. Following strict forensic protocol, the investigators carefully removed the containers from the unit and transported them to the medical examiner's office. The stench of decomposition grew stronger as each piece of evidence was handled. Upon arrival, an X-ray scan was conducted on the contents before any physical examination took place. The scans confirmed investigators' worst fears. Inside the coolers and bags lay human remains, stored in layers of plastic. The Ramsey County Medical Examiner's Office undertook the painstaking task of conducting a full autopsy. The torso, first to be unwrapped, was bound and placed inside multiple trash bags, reinforcing the methodical approach taken to conceal the remains. Next, the head was examined, revealing layers of plastic tightly wound around it. Lastly, the remaining limbs were extracted from the duffel bag, similarly encased in thick plastic. The unwrapping process took hours, as forensic specialists carefully worked to preserve any potential evidence embedded within the wrappings. Once the layers had been removed, investigators were able to confirm the identity of the remains through multiple means, including tattoos and dental records. The body was officially identified as belonging to Maniji Starin, bringing the horrifying mystery of her disappearance to a grim conclusion. With this devastating confirmation, authorities returned to the surveillance footage captured from Maniji's apartment, analyzing every detail. Their review provided undeniable evidence of what had transpired. The bags Jorgensson was seen carrying out of her apartment were, in fact, the very containers now discovered in the storage unit. This led to one inescapable conclusion. Jorgensson had murdered Maniji, dismembered her inside her own home, and meticulously transported her remains in stages before ultimately stashing them in the rented storage facility. Jorgensson was subsequently charged with an array of severe criminal offenses. The most damning among them was a charge of second-degree murder, reflecting the brutality of his actions. Additionally, prosecutors leveled charges of arson against him for his deliberate attempt to destroy evidence by setting fire to his apartment during the SWAT team's raid. The list of charges continued to expand, including multiple counts of making threats of violence and attempting to disarm a law enforcement officer during his confrontation with police. On the afternoon of June 30th, 2023, Jorgensson appeared briefly in court to address the murder charge. Clad in an orange jumpsuit, his demeanor alternated between defiance and indifference as he sat before the judge. Throughout the proceedings, he shook his head from side to side, reacting visibly to Assistant Ramsey County Attorney Isabella Eastwood's detailed recitation of the grisly findings outlined in the criminal complaint. Eastwood emphasized the calculated nature of Jorgensson's crimes, highlighting the horrific lengths he had gone to in concealing the murders. She petitioned the court for bail to be set at $5 million, a request that Judge Timothy Carey granted without hesitation. Despite the gravity of the accusations, Jorgensson remained largely silent, his only contribution to the hearing being the confirmation of his name when prompted. His court-appointed defense attorney refrained from contesting the bail amount at that moment, signaling that a more comprehensive legal strategy was in development. The reserved approach suggested that Jorgensson's defense team was carefully weighing their options as they prepared for what promised to be a high-profile trial. As the legal process unfolded, an even more shocking revelation emerged, casting a sinister new light on the case. During a press conference held that same day, St. Paul Police Sergeant Mike Ernster disclosed a critical development in the ongoing investigation. Authorities had linked Jorgensson to the disappearance of another woman. The missing person was identified as Fanta Zayavong, a 33-year-old woman who had previously been romantically involved with Jorgensson. Disturbingly, Zayavong had last been seen in July 2021, and in a chilling parallel to Maniji Starin's case, her final known whereabouts placed her in the company of Jorgensson. Shockingly, her disappearance had never been formally reported, an omission that raised serious questions about how she had slipped through the cracks. However, in light of the mounting evidence against Jorgensson, police had recently reopened her case as a missing person investigation. The renewed scrutiny would soon lead to yet another grim discovery. Just 1 week later, on July 7, 2023, law enforcement officials held another press briefing, delivering news that deepened the already horrifying scope of Jorgensson's crimes. Officers revealed that the remains of Fanta Zayavong had been found in a separate storage unit, this time located in Rapids, approximately 30 miles north of the unit where Maniji Starin's body had been discovered. Investigators had acted on intelligence gathered from surveillance footage, financial transactions, and Jorgensson's past behavior, leading them to the gruesome site. Authorities withheld specific details regarding the condition of Zayavong's remains and the method of her disposal, but it was widely speculated that her fate had mirrored that of Maniji Starin. As the criminal case against Jorgensson intensified, Maniji Staren's grieving family took a moment to express their gratitude to the St. Paul Police Department and investigative teams. In a heartfelt statement, they thanked the authorities for their unwavering determination in pursuing every possible lead. Their relentless search for the truth had not only ensured justice for Maniji, but it also uncovered the fate of another victim, preventing Jorgensson from potentially harming more women. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Jorgensson ultimately made a stunning decision. He opted to plead guilty rather than face trial. On the record, he admitted to 2 counts of second-degree intentional murder, formally confessing to the brutal killings of both Fanta Zayavong and Maniji Mani Staren. In an unsettling revelation, Jorgensson also acknowledged that he had deliberately dismembered both victims in an effort to evade detection. As part of his plea deal, Joseph Jorgensson accepted a concurrent sentence of 40 years in prison for each murder.